The image shows an elderly man with a beard breathing heavily and making wheezing sounds. She, holding a bowl of flatbreads, turns to Man So and expresses her regret. The man is lying down, and she puts a bowl of food in front of him and says there is no problem. In a snowy yard stands a traditional house around which snow falls and a loud sound of wind can be heard. Yoon-hyun stands alone on a snowy road, snowflakes swirling around and bare tree branches visible. An old man coughs and says that 50 years have passed since he came to this cursed place. Yoon-hyun and the others are scared while traveling to a corporate seminar when something dangerous suddenly happens. The car was caught in a landslide when rocks and earth fell from above, creating a dangerous situation. Yoon-hyun and another man look at a giant fox with 3 tails that is roaring, and one of them explains its unusualness. The image shows a 2-headed red snake, one head wide open while the other sticks out its tongue. 3 strange men are flying in the sky. One of them is talking about strange people who can fly. With the mountains as a backdrop, Yoon-hyun falls into the world as if from the cover of a book, and it is said that they fell into this world. A group of people stand on the grass and look up. One of them reflects that his colleagues will live better than everyone else, despite the books he has read. Yoon-hyun stands with his back to the dark space, his figure standing out as a light outline against the darkness. A character with blue hair and horns speaks of wise beings who have descended from above. A blue dragon appears against a stormy sky, carrying someone into the sky, while silhouettes of people watching are visible below. Yoon-hyun and another man watch a bustling market in an ancient town under fluttering fabrics and lanterns. The image shows the roofs of traditional buildings against the sky, with no characters present. Yoon-hyun admits that they were hoping for something special for them too. Yoon-hyun reveals he and director Kim didn't have any special abilities. Several men are hard at work on a construction site, breaking and laying bricks, while one of them ponders what they could do in this world. On the table are old books with 2 wrestlers on the cover, and a voiceover tells how someone can't live like this anymore and spent all their money on something. A man shows off his fighting prowess by taking down several opponents while one watches from behind. The man says that the hero served the nation, studied increasingly advanced martial arts, and, having become a strong warrior, went to Janghu. Yoon-hyun stands with a shovel on the broken ground, watching 2 workers in front of a building under construction. He wonders if something special will happen to him. Yoon-hyun looks at his wounded hands and mentally says that he will continue until the very end. An old man lies on the ground and coughs, and in his thoughts he says that he is dying from a common cold. An elderly man is coughing heavily and blood is flowing from his mouth. Yoon-hyun mentally confessed that he tried his best to live. Yoon-hyun shows his hands in front of a vegetable garden and talks about how he made a living, bought a small plot of land and built a house. Yoon-hyun said he started making good money when he started making soap with lye, noting that soap was a new concept in medieval China. An elderly man with a white beard and hair was carrying boxes, while the text said that, despite something, the situation continues. At the market, several people are looking at the goods on the shelves, and an elderly man with a tray stands in the center, attracting attention. The image shows a strong wind or storm, conveying an atmosphere of tension without the presence of characters. Yoon-hyun clenched his teeth, blood oozing out, making crunching sounds. An elderly man with tears in his eyes says that even if he is not special, it does not change his feelings. The image shows a close-up of a face with tears visible, and the character says he has no more strength. Through the dark silhouettes of the trees, a winter landscape with bare branches and falling snow can be seen, accompanied by the sound of the wind. Yoon-hyun mooses that if he had more strength, he could have more opportunities. Yoon-hyun makes a sharp sound to express pain or discomfort. Yoon-hyun, lying on the grass, ponders why he is still alive and recognizes the clothes he wore on Earth. Several people, including Yoon-hyun, are recovering on the grass after falling or colliding, while one of the women looks around worriedly. Yoon-hyun realizes with a slight smile that he came into this world with some strength. Yoon-hyun stands with his back turned, watching a group of people in a clearing, one man kneeling and several discussing something tensely. Yoon-hyun strolls calmly along a forest path under a bright sunny sky among green trees. The man recalls that on the first day of their corporate trip, they found themselves in this strange world, and Yoon-hyun listens to him calmly against the backdrop of nature. Yoon-hyun says that while riding an SUV, they were suddenly hit by a landslide, and he saw a bright light. Yoon-hyun stands in a field of flowers and turns to the manager, thinking to himself. Yoon-hyun reflects thoughtfully on how most stories of regression begin with violence against the future. Another man called out to Yun-hyun sharply, grabbing his shoulder and calling for his attention. The man with short hair abruptly hit Yun-hyun on the back, causing him to react unexpectedly. 4 people are standing on the street. One of them in a sports jacket looks ahead in surprise, and the rest express different emotions from surprise to thoughtfulness. Yun-hyun calls out another man for dozing off while driving in the mountains, calling him an idiot. Yun-hyun remembered that he hadn't heard the name in a long time and admitted that he had forgotten about it. The man threatens manager Seo that he will lose his job immediately upon his return, to which he responds with alarm, calling him Department Head Young Myung-hoon. He says the man is the nephew of the director of the company where he worked and was promoted to department head at age 32, thanks to nepotism. A man accuses another of causing a landslide due to his nap and asks if Chio is angry with him. Yun-hyun leans on one hand as he rises from the grass with the forest in the background, wondering why he fell asleep. Yun-hyun sits at his desk in the office, staring at the screen and touching the bridge of his nose, clearly feeling tired or stressed. Yun-hyun, with blood on his lip and face, looks forward with determination despite the pain. 3 men are arguing on a lawn. One of them is shouting that they are in a difficult situation, and the 4th is watching and thinking about what is happening. Yun-hyun recalls how he was so shocked he apologized to John Myung-hoon, thinking he was wrong. There's a man on his knees on the ground, and a group of bandits are standing around him with guns, and he's telling people that he spent 50 years apologizing to people even when he was being robbed. In front of Yun-hyun, who was standing on a raised platform between 2 guards, the man knelt down and said that he had constantly apologized when a regional official took everything from him for taxes. Yun-hyun reflects on realizing one important thing after years of hiding it. Yun-hyun tightly squeezed his knee while sitting against the backdrop of autumn nature. Yun-hyun addresses Department Head John, starting the conversation with a respectful address. Yun-hyun stands in the meadow and says that now is the time to act. A man screams in rage and prepares to punch, while another man behind him looks shocked. Yun-hyun abruptly punches a man with dark wavy hair, expressing aggression. Yun-hyun looks away with a slight smile despite the scratches on his face, expressing calm and confidence. Yun-hyun delivers a powerful punch to the man in the white shirt, who is thrown back by the force of the punch. 3 people look at something in shock. One of them says, with fear, that the situation is worse than they thought. Yun-hyun recalls being beaten multiple times by martial artists in his past life as he punches his opponent. Yun-hyun delivers a powerful punch to the man, who flies back with blood coming out of his mouth. A man in a leopard cape furiously punches another man while 3 onlookers stand behind without interfering. Yun-hyun delivers a powerful punch to the man, who screams in pain and falls back. Against the backdrop of a forest, several people are in shock, and the narrator reflects on how, in a world of violence, he has acquired what they lack. The image shows the moment of being punched in the face, accompanied by thoughts that violence increases fear if you hit the eyes. Yun-hyun reflects that after being beaten, only 2 words escape his lips. Yun-hyun sits on top of the man and hears him apologize, asking for forgiveness. A man lies on the grass with a bloody nose, thinking that he does not have the mythical talents or outstanding fighting skills mentioned by others. Yun-hyun breathed a sigh of relief as he looked up at the clear sky. Yun-hyun walks up to a man who is holding his head in pain while another man accuses him. Yun-hyun, with his back to nature, admits that the other person is right and says that he was very angry. Yun-hyun hangs his head and apologizes for the accident, thinking he will never see these people again. The man explained that Department Head Jong was too strict and that nothing could be changed in that situation, adding that the other person had overreacted anyway. Yun-hyun agrees with the director, confirming his words with the backdrop of nature. Yun-hyun reflects on how if he supports someone in this life, he will receive something in return while looking at the traditional buildings ahead. Yun-hyun is focused on taking a favorable position now. Yun-hyun leaned forward and said that it was justified. The image shows a man with a bloody nose looking angry and trying to say something while another hand reaches out to him. Yun-hyun looks forward with a slight smile against a blue sky with clouds. Yun-hyun, noticing that the man is sweating and looking tired, extends his hand to him in an attempt to support him. A man stands in the forest and suggests leaving it to find a village. Yun-hyun looks away thoughtfully, thinking about the upcoming tasks. 2 men discuss whether one of them sees something in the distance, and he agrees, while reflecting that common sense has no place in this world. Yun-hyun watches as the immortals fight the monster, trying to maintain their immortality while surrounded by lightning and magic. Against the backdrop of a burning castle, 2 men with swords fight, and one explains that in this world the strong devour the weak, and people fight for wealth and honor. The group stands near the forest, and he explains that this place is called the Path of Ascension. Yun noted that there was no village, city, or country around, looking around with the mountains and waterfall in the background. The man notes that the sun will soon set, and Unhyun suggests they take shelter in a safe place. He thoughtfully touched his chin and agreed with his interlocutor, saying that he was right. Yun wonders about the car, looking at the trunk filled with boxes and water bottles. Yun decided not to waste his energy on persuasion and let them look for a car on their own. Yun suggests one to look for a car and the other to look for something else against the backdrop of a sunset mountain landscape. The image shows a forest at night under a cloudy sky. The character Unhyun is missing. The fire burns brightly on the ground, crackling and knocking sounds are heard, and someone begins to speak. She holds a piece of food in her hands and starts talking about her car ride. There are several people sitting around the fire. One of them says that the food tastes unusual, and Unhyun eats quietly, watching the others. Yun offers his interlocutor to take as much as she needs with a slight smile, sitting next to the fire. The man says with a slight smile that he always knew about the reliability and diligence of his interlocutor while working for the company. Man explains he is tired while driving due to late work while another lies on the ground in a cave. She smiles and says that their manager is really hardworking. Two women smile and one of them asks, confirming what was said, if this is correct. Yun said it's okay to just accept the compliment, with a stone wall in the background. Yun thinks with a slight smile about the last moment that will come tonight. He gets very excited and starts talking, offering something, while sweating and shaking. A wolf with red eyes notices an unusual smell and thinks it is unique to humans. Yun, kneeling at the creature's feet, reflects that despite living for thousands of years, he has never smelled the scent of humans like this. She rubs her eyes and starts to speak, asking a question, but doesn't manage to finish. The crowd screams in panic about a monster. One of the women exclaims in fear that she sees a monster. He demands respect for the forest lord with a tense expression on his face. A huge creature with sharp teeth threatens, saying that it usually tears off all limbs. A man trembles on his knees in front of a huge wolf, and the beast says that he will forgive if someone knows how to treat him. Two men kneel and listen in fear as a threat is made that staying on the property will come at a price, and one of them offers to give his hand in exchange for his life. Yun, breathing heavily and sweating, leans on the ground, feeling very tense and tired. There are unconscious or dead people lying in the clearing. One of them is trying to sit up. A loud sound is heard. He thought that the fox appreciated his manners this time. The wolf with red eyes asks who will give him a hand, and in response, he hears that this time, not all the limbs will be given, like last time. Yun says with a tense look that this is all that needs to be sacrificed. 3 cloaked figures float in the air, and a voiceover says that even a lost arm will be healed by the cultivators who will appear in 2 days. Yun looks at the root of a plant on the grass and thinks about something, adding a plus in his mind. Yun, kneeling on the grass, rolls up his sleeve and prepares to propose something. A group of people emerging from a cave look forward with fear and surprise, expressing shock and alarm. A hand reaches out to the open mouth of a huge beast, who warns that he knows manners and will try to make the pain as little as possible. A man screams in pain as blood gushes from his chest. The image shows a wounded wolf head with red eyes and blood flowing from its mouth against a backdrop of a forest and blue sky. 2 people, one of whom is Yun, are in severe pain while leaning on their hands on the grass in the forest. Yun, who was shot in the shoulder, screams and tries to grab the grass on the ground, calling it grass. He screams with pain in his voice that it hurts a lot, biting the root of the plant and shedding tears. The white wolf with red eyes says he expected a different taste, but a human tastes the same, and even worse because of the impurities in the blood. Yun is breathing heavily and says he is in a lot of pain. The wolf announces that he will allow you to stay on his territory for 7 days, and, thanks to his divinity, will save your life. Yun falls to the ground after a powerful blow, and a figure is seen in the sky flying away. Several people run in panic and call for the managers. Yun, injured and on his knees, suggests going inside as the other 3 walk towards him across the grass. Yun reveals he met a fox when he left a cave early in the morning. The man asked in surprise if they were in Murim, and behind him were 2 open-mouthed listeners. Yun, clutching his injured arm, says they'll be safe for a week after he sacrificed his arm. Yun breathes heavily and says something happened while standing near the rocky wall. Yoon-hyun suddenly appears in front of the frightened people in the cave, causing them shock and fear. Yoon-hyun sits with his head down, injured in the arm, and hears that manager Seo sacrificed his arm. Yoon-hyun, sweating, asks who would agree to give up an arm and a leg in a week, and asks them to say that they agree with them too. The group discusses a man in a black tracksuit. One of them says that he provided them with food and shelter and offers to study with him. Yoon-hyun stands in the shadow of the cave and says that since he has already lost his arm, Yoon-hyun said with a serious expression that he wouldn't last long anyway. The image shows a sound or effect accompanying a sudden action or event with no visible characters. Yoon-hyun stands in the dark with a serious expression and a bloodstain on his shirt. Yoon-hyun watches from the shadows as the group discusses the brutal demand to give up a limb to a fox every week. Yoon-hyun takes the stone and starts saying that it's not quite like that. Yoon-hyun listens to the man in the white shirt who refuses and says that it is definitely not like that. Yoon-hyun, holding a rock, reflects that with 50 years of experience in violence, he can easily kill a modern man like John Myung-hoon with one hand. Yoon-hyun addresses 3 people on the street in the evening, explaining something with gestures while one of them stands with his arms crossed. Yoon-hyun, with a bloodstain on his sleeve, sighs in relief and throws the rock away, saying no to himself. Yoon-hyun stands in a dark cave holding a hand on their shoulder, feeling like something has paralyzed their minds. Yoon-hyun looks away thoughtfully, as if listening to something in the dark. Yoon-hyun said with a slight smile that they are good people. The image shows a calm forest under a clear sky, with no visible characters. Yoon-hyun stands in front of a 2-headed snake with 2 men, and the lyrics say that the snake only asks for a little blood. Man sweating as he rolls up his sleeve and prepares for action as he moves through the forest. Yoon-hyun, with a cut on his hand, watches the 2 snakes and says that this human blood is the most disgusting. Yoon-hyun thinks about a man soaked in nicotine and cholesterol, while another man with blood on his hand gets angry and swears at him. Yoon-hyun stands with his arm torn off, and another man asks in surprise if he called him by his full name. He hesitantly confessed, and Yoon-hyun offered to tell him about edible herbs and fruits, inviting him to follow him. Yoon-hyun, smiling slightly, tells another man that he will be appearing on FOX next week, while the man looks worried and sweats. Yoon-hyun sweats and smiles as he thanks someone, expressing his appreciation. Yoon-hyun thinks with a slight smile that the fox won't come back and it will never be useful, expressing doubt in the word thank you. Yoon-hyun yells at John Myung-hoon, demanding that he focus and stop making mistakes with the fruit. Yoon-hyun sternly warned the other that the fruit could kill him, to which he apologized in fear. Yoon-hyun stands with a wound on his arm and holds mushrooms, while 2 men pick up fallen mushrooms, and one of them screams in panic. Yoon-hyun, breathing heavily, sat down on the ground next to the hole that had formed and said that he needed a break. Yoon-hyun recalls how John Myung-hoon punished him when he first joined the company. On the ground lies a torn-out ginseng with leaves and berries, accompanied by an exclamation about its discovery. He looks at the root of the plant he holds in his hands with fear and sweats from surprise. Yoon-hyun confirmed that it was something like that, while the other man looked surprised and explained that it wasn't ginseng, but yellow bamboo root. Yoon-hyun explains that the yellow bamboo roots, usually the size of a pinky finger, grow to the size shown in the image. He explains that this medicine will not be useful to cultivators, but will help Director Kim increase his chi. He asks excitedly if it is possible to dig up that much wild ginseng, and Yoon-hyun replies that it is possible and advises him to take off his shirt to do so. Yoon-hyun stands with his back to the storm in the mountains. Thunder is heard and lightning is seen in the sky. Yoon-hyun watches as fire and light collide in a powerful explosion of energy. A powerful explosion occurs with bright flashes of fire and lightning, creating an effect of destruction and tension. The man screams in pain, clutching his head, while Yoon-hyun, leaning on one hand, breathes heavily and groans. 3 figures in the darkness hear a scream, and one of them exclaims in amazement. A man with dark hair screams and holds his head while 2 other men watch him in shock. 2 people with glowing eyes stand in the darkness, one in golden robes, the other in armor, creating a tense atmosphere before a possible clash. Yoon-hyun stands watching the man who is kneeling down and trying to say something. Yoon-hyun stands with 2 men in traditional clothing, discussing his roots, which he mentioned with a slight smile. A man concentrates on creating a bright ball of energy surrounded by lightning, preparing for a powerful action. Yoon-hyun and the other 2 men float in the air, watching as the man below screams in pain, surrounded by a bright flash of energy. The man with the lute demands to give in, declaring that it is his turn, and Yunhyun watches with interest, holding his hand, sparkling with energy. Yunhyun plays the guitar by making sounds with the strings. She is in a panic and stress, sighing heavily and clutching her head with her hands. Yunhyun watches as someone in the distance dodges a powerful red and black attack that pierces through space. The image shows an unidentified woman holding a musical instrument and laughing against a purple light background. Yunhyun stomps hard on the ground, causing an explosion and raising dust and grass around him. The bearded man exclaims excitedly about the unique holy body, and Yunhyun asks in confusion, "What's going on?" The bearded man says with a smile that they are disciples of the Azure Sky Heavenly Creation sect, and the three of them have the talent for change. He can't breathe and feels like he'll die if he refuses, marveling at the force that's acting on him. Yunhyun confidently stated that they have all the cultivation methods, while another man sweated and the third one cursed angrily to himself. Treasures and swords are shown against the backdrop of a temple at night, and a voice promises power, glory, and wealth that can move the heavens. Yunhyun watches as the group discusses the suitability of a cult, with one person lying unconscious on the ground and someone asking to wait. Yunhyun opens the vessel, steam comes out, creating an atmosphere of mystery. A man in traditional dress asks how he achieved the path of ascension with such a worthless body, while another man falls forward in fear and tension. A man with dark hair and a beard holds an unconscious man down, conjuring blue flames while another watches, preparing a potion. Yunhyun, with blue energy burning on his hand, forces himself to say his thanks despite the visible pain and wound. Yunhyun carries a man on his shoulder and follows two figures who point the way. The man shouts for them to wait for him and runs quickly through the dark grass. Yunhyun recalls that 50 years ago they were ignored, despite all their screams as if they were insects. He shows his hand and thinks that at least his hand was cured. Yunhyun said "damn" in frustration as a brightly glowing comet flashed past the night sky. A meteor shines brightly in the night sky, leaving a glowing trail among the stars and clouds. A man looks at a falling star in horror, breathing heavily as sweat runs down his face. In the forest, during heavy rain and thunderstorms, lightning flashes, creating a tense atmosphere with no visible characters. At night, a loud sound is heard in the forest, accompanied by rain and a flickering fire behind the rocks. She lies on the ground with her eyes closed, blood on her lips and a pained expression on her face. She supports the injured woman in her arms and asks if there is any. Yunhyun stands in a dark place with a torn and dirty sleeve, looking back with a slight smile. Yunhyun stands by a fire in a cave. A girl sits next to him saying, "Huh?" in surprise, and a man in an orange jacket leans forward, watching them. The image shows a leg peeking out from under a curtain, creating an atmosphere of mystery and anticipation. Yunhyun stands in a dark cave, his hand clenched into a fist, and a loud sound is heard. A man in an orange jacket reacts in horror to something, while Yunhyun calmly watches him from the shadows. Yunhyun stated with a slight smile that he is the Sea Dragon King. A loud sound is heard in the darkness, and a crack appears on the ground with light from within. Yunhyun suddenly appeared and said that he came to find out the reason two men listened to him. He noted with a slight smile that she wasn't even doing it consciously. Yunhyun, with an injured shoulder, explains that they won't be here long, addressing the interlocutor with horns and long hair. A character with blue hair and horns laughs loudly while putting his hand to his head. A man with blue hair and horns laughs and talks about pre-planned powerful cultivators. Yunhyun asks a man in traditional clothing with a slight smile if it's too convenient to appear in front of a woman while standing above someone on the ground. The image shows a majestic building with a powerful stream of light emanating from it, surrounded by clouds and aurora with no visible characters. Yunhyun explains that this place is known as the Path of Ascension, or the Path to Ascension, standing in front of the luminous stream. Yunhyun explains that in a few months a dimensional rift called the Ascension Gate will open here. Against the backdrop of the starry sky, powerful spiritual beings with red eyes are shown, who gather to ascend to the higher realm once every 1,000 years. Yunhyun calmly said that he understood, and the other man looked worried and tried to explain something. The image shows a man in orange clothing, anxiously trying to explain something with his finger raised. Yunhyun carefully adjusts the sleeve of his dragon-emblazoned robe as he prepares to say something. He holds the vessel and explains that they need to be stored inside a magical object. Yunhyun calmly shows the vessel and talks about it. The image shows a tall golden pagoda surrounded by clouds and a rainbow, with fingers visible in the background as if holding it. Yoon and the other man look forward in surprise, expressing shock and confusion. He gently placed his hand on the head of the woman with blood coming from her mouth, expressing concern and support. A man panics and screams to stop Yoon, who is supporting an unconscious woman named Oh. A man in an orange jacket coughs heavily while leaning on his knees in a tense situation in the rain. The man is in severe pain, gritting his teeth and sweating, groaning loudly. Woon smiles as he holds an unconscious woman in his arms, while another man screams in pain and says it's best for everyone. A character with green eyes and horns warns against asking questions of high-level cultivators while smiling on a rainy night. Yoon watches with tension as the man with bloodshot eyes tries to breathe and wheezes. Yoon takes a step, his foot touching the ground against the rocky surface. Yoon stands in a cave holding an unconscious woman while two men struggle to get up on their knees. The tense atmosphere before the action begins is depicted against the backdrop of a stormy sky with lightning and rain. In the midst of a thunderstorm, a huge blue dragon soars into the sky, letting out a loud roar. Yoon stands under the bright sun with a blue sky and green trees as a backdrop, enjoying the calm and clear day. She looks thoughtfully into the distance and asks what this is all about. A woman talks about immortals and dragons kidnapping her colleagues while Yoon and another man listen to her in nature. Yoon carefully approaches the woman sitting on the rock and places his hand on her shoulder, supporting her in the forest. He approaches Manager So, asking for his help. She says with concern that she won't be able to survive in this situation. Yoon leans forward against the backdrop of a green forest and blue sky, his face showing a slight smile and calm. She is in tears and screaming in fear, expressing great shock and fear. One man suddenly felt something dangerous approaching and shouted about it, while another asked what happened to him, turning to Director Kim. The image shows a sky with clouds and a flock of birds flying over a green forest. There are no characters. The man in the orange jacket anxiously reported that something had appeared, turning to his interlocutor. The old man riding the mechanical lion asked in surprise about the mortals, watching around. Yoon stands still as the man in the orange jacket screams and the woman kneels with her head in her hands as she watches the man with white hair. An old man with a staff, hovering above the ground, addresses mortals with a question about a powerful consciousness emanating from someone nearby. The old man with the monocle exclaims that he felt such a powerful aura, as if a sage from the higher spheres had descended to earth. A man in an orange jacket claimed that Kim's manager was their colleague while the woman sat on her knees, and another man leaned on a cane. A man in an orange jacket falls backwards, while an elderly man with a cane watches him against the backdrop of a forest and mountains. Yoon with an injured arm screams to get Director Kim's attention. In the clearing, two people fall at high speed, while two others watch in surprise. A man in an orange jacket thanks Deputy Manager, who lies behind him after the collision. A man in orange asks fearfully if everything is okay with his burnt back. The old man invited the girl to come in, explaining that he would awaken in her a spiritual root that she did not have. She cries, and he gently squeezes her face. She barely says, "Director." An elderly man with white hair warns against attachments to the worldly, addressing his interlocutor. Two men simultaneously clutch their throats and groan in pain, as if trying to suppress suffocation. An old man threatens to break the bonds while standing with a staff, and a woman on her knees begs him to stop, while two people hover above them in the air. The old man with the monocle speaks, demanding understanding, but Yoon is not shown in this scene. Yoon used one hand to forcefully push away the two men who fell to the ground in the forest. An old man with white hair violently releases magical energy from his hand, surrounded by purple light and a tense atmosphere. Yoon looks at the man kneeling next to a mysterious glowing portal that he can't figure out where it will land. Yoon tries to grab the herbs while the other man screams in panic and falls into a black crater. A woman panics and screams for Yoon not to leave as an old man watches them from behind a glowing portal. Yoon and another man are lying unconscious on the floor in a room with stone walls, with objects scattered around and blood visible on Yoon's hand. Yoon lies on the ground and expresses surprise with a slight smile, saying, "Huh?" Yoon covers his head with his hand as he watches a group of people walk down the street in the bright daylight. The man with the red cloth says that he never went to such a place in his past life, and the other one asks who this madman is. Yoon thinks out loud that the Immortal was telling the truth, and the landing location is random, but this path seems familiar to him. Yoon, shielding his eyes from the sun with his hand, realized that this was the place where he once lived. Yunhyun, his back burnt, stands at the pagoda, looking around as people in traditional dress walk past. On a busy street in an ancient city, many people in traditional clothes walk towards large buildings against a clear sky. Yunhyun said he couldn't keep track of what was happening anymore while standing next to an empty wooden box. Yunhyun and the man in the orange jacket are sitting on the floor in the corner, and the latter says that everything will be the same. The man sighs and says he should probably feel relieved, but is still concerned about being left behind. Yunhyun calmly replied that he didn't know about it either. A group of armed men stand over a man kneeling with a load on his back, one of them smiling mockingly as he watches him. Yunhyun suggests leaving here forever, watching the people on the street. The image shows a top-down view of an ancient city with numerous buildings and streets, but there are no characters. A crowd of people in traditional dress strolls leisurely along the street of an ancient city under red lanterns. Yunhyun stands next to a man in an orange jacket who remarks that it sounds like Chinese. Yunhyun stands next to a scared man in an orange jacket who reacts in surprise to what was said. Yunhyun says he knows a little with a slight smile as he turns around in front of a street with traditional buildings. The image shows a man in an orange jacket saying with surprise and joy that this is great, against the backdrop of a street with traditional buildings. Yunhyun noticed that the language spoken around him was not Chinese, but sounded completely different despite the same characters. A man recalls being teased by beggars for 2 months in a past life to learn the basics of a language, while 3 laughing men mock him. Yunhyun, holding the torn clothes, says that there is no need for them now and suggests buying new ones, to which the interlocutor is surprised and asks how to do this. The image shows a traditional Oriental hall with a sign, Machine Hall, against a clear blue sky. The elderly man is delighted and surprised that he's allowed to buy such valuable herbs. Yunhyun explains that the bamboo roots are over 800 years old, as another man carefully points them out, and a third watches in amazement. Yunhyun, with a slight smile and beads of sweat, admits that he never had so much money in his previous life. Yunhyun asked him to hurry up, to which the older man happily replied that he would do it immediately. The image shows a traditional house against a clear sky, and the question is asked if this is the house they are supposed to come to. Yunhyun promised to learn the language of this place, to which the other man responded with gratitude. Yunhyun explains that after the bribes and the purchase of the land, there's only 1 silver bar left, and the man in blue asks in surprise what is going on. Yunhyun, with bloodstains on his back, walks away silently while the other man looks at him with worry and sweats. Yunhyun offers to call them by name, explaining that they are in a new place. A man thanks his interlocutor with a slight smile against the backdrop of a traditional building and a clear sky. At night, lights shine in the windows of a traditional house against the backdrop of a starry sky and trees. The image shows a lighted lamp on a wooden table in a room with a tiled floor, while someone begins to explain the reason for the sale. There are 3 ginseng roots with leaves on the table, and Yunhyun explains that they need to be used. A man in blue clothes ponders thoughtfully as Yunhyun suggests using the silver from the sale for some plan while standing at a table with plants. Yunhyun talks about how with the money and skills of a former mid-sized company CEO, they can make a living. Yunhyun reflects on his regression and wonders why he doesn't. The man thoughtfully says that director Kim Young-hoon is a genius martial artist. The image shows martial arts books and says that after reading low-quality street books, he became a martial artist in a few months. A man stands with his back to traditional buildings and is told that after learning advanced techniques, he became one of the most powerful martial artists in Jianghu. Yunhyun wistfully muses on what if he had studied advanced martial arts from the start. Against the backdrop of a bright explosion stands an old man with a long beard, holding a large sword on his shoulder, ready to fight. He is adamant that he will make the most of working for him. A man in light clothes expressed his fear that the Jianghu gangs might come to them if they opened a business, while Yunhyun listened to him standing next to the table. The man said the word ARTS with surprise and joy in his voice. Yunhyun thinks of himself as a renowned connoisseur of Morim novels with a slight smile. The image shows a magical symbol with 7 ornaments and text explaining the division of the Jianghu sects into orthodox and unorthodox. The image shows a man in orange preparing to attack, while others discuss the differences between the cults, explaining their characteristics and methods of handling information. An elderly man in a hood with chains on his hands says that there are rumors about someone's high qualifications, and behind him stand 2 dark figures with glowing eyes. The man in blue said with a smile that this was, of course, the Demon Slayer sect, turning to his interlocutor. Yun explains that the sword is not just a weapon, but a symbol of strength and honor against the backdrop of the sunset sky. Against the backdrop of a traditional building under a clear sky, Yun stands calmly with a slight smile. The man with the backpack explained that the tall, muscular man in orange was his older brother, and another listener noted that he had heard of his fame. The image shows a muscular, bearded man in an orange kimono, thoughtfully saying, while standing in front of a traditional building. A man apologizes, explaining that he has no money, while looking at his interlocutor in a street setting. Hyun smiles as he shows a coin while offering something while standing on the street among passers-by. The image shows a large traditional palace complex against a blue sky with clouds and birds flying by. Yun stands in front of a traditional building and says that the other person wants to learn martial arts. Hyun opened the ring box with a smile and started saying that there was one of them and that a man in yellow was watching him. The man attracted attention by coughing to start a conversation. The man explains that they don't give special treatment for donations and will only accept one, and one of those present is outraged by such a price. The image shows a man in a rage. He is screaming, expressing strong emotions while the background of the room is blurred around him. Yun smiles and makes a hand gesture while the man behind him looks surprised and worried. A man walks out of a room holding a decorated box and closing the door behind him. The man in yellow touched Yun's back and said he would have chosen a different group if he had known in advance. Yun said with a slight smile that he would open a business with the remaining money and would support his interlocutor. Man in yellow clothes panicking and sweating, expressing strong anxiety in traditional interior room. The man in yellow explains to Yun that he won't be able to do much, expressing concern and gesturing. Against the backdrop of a large palace with traditional architecture, someone gives thanks by saying the word thanks. The competition arena was filled with spectators ready to watch the upcoming competition. A man with a long beard clutches a staff and exclaims with rage, while a man in orange standing next to him is surprised by his reaction. Yun stands with a sword, watching the fallen man in orange, while the others in orange and black look at him with hostility, calling him a stranger. Several fighters in orange kimonos are lying on the ground. One of them says with effort that all his beloved students have been defeated. Yun fights with a sword against an opponent in a combat arena, focusing on parrying his opponent's blow. Yun abruptly punched the man in the orange uniform, injuring him as he tried to defend himself. 3 warriors in orange robes attack with swords, one of them shouting that the enemy is a damned stranger. Yun quickly fights off multiple attackers, easily repelling their attacks and showing superiority in combat. In front of the palace, a powerful man sits surrounded by guards as a crowd watches him, noting the talented martial artists of the sect. Yun stands with a sword while several people in orange robes lie on the ground, one of them groaning in pain while 3 watch from the stairs. A man raises his sword to the sky, demonstrating strength and confidence in battle. Against a backdrop of sky and trees, 2 men with tense expressions discuss a year of martial arts training and the first grade level. The image shows a large man's face with a tense expression and a bead of sweat on his forehead. He is clearly experiencing strong emotions or stress. Against the backdrop of a traditional roof, an order is given to immediately capture someone. Several people in orange clothing patrol the corridors and courtyard of the traditional building. Yun explains that because an outsider had mastered the sect elder's skills, the sect fell into chaos within 7 months. A man in orange and blue robes stabs with a sword, and the text says that he was locked in the chambers, suspected of spying for another sect. Yun, sitting at a table, thoughtfully explains that he was arrested at the market, although he does not know martial arts and does not understand why he is considered a suspect. The man in orange is swinging his sword vigorously, while Yun sits quietly at the table and watches him. Yun stands behind the patterned door and starts talking about martial arts and novels. A sword blade suddenly appears in the room, creating a tense atmosphere. The man with the sword says that he is approaching the next wall, and if he crosses it, he will be able to move on. Yun is amazed at the other fighter's rapid progress, calling him a monster and noting that he has almost reached the next level. Yun explains that the level in question is that of the great sect leaders and elders, known in Yangguo as absolute masters. With snow-capped mountains as a backdrop, Yun explains that Martial Peak is essentially Yoon Yoon noted with a slight smile that the birth of the world's greatest swordsman will be accelerated by 40 years instead of 30. The image shows a traditional Oriental style building, and at the top it says, 7 days have passed since the previous events. A man meditates surrounded by 3 glowing blue lotuses, with a sword in a sheath lying in front of him. A man exhales blue smoke and makes a hoo sound, lost in tranquility. Yoon Hyun explains with surprise that the chi flower only appears in the best martial artists, and that 3 of these flowers gather at the top of the... Yoon Hyun stands in a room in front of a hooded figure who explains that it is a barrier. Yoon Hyun said, "Wow," with a slight smile in surprise. Yoon Hyun says with a slight smile that he never knew about himself while holding a sword in his hands. Several people walk quickly, and someone loudly calls out to Yoon Hong and his comrade. The man in gray clothes furiously announces that they have received orders to destroy the spy's chi core, while 2 other men behind him listen intently. A man in light-colored clothing insists he is not a spy, surrounded by 6 armed men in orange and gray clothes. Yoon Hyun gets punched in the face, and the attacker accuses him and the other of using code language. Yoon Hyun quickly attacks the enemy with his sword, which is deflected by the enemy, piercing the attacker's arm. A man screams in horror as a sword pierces his arm and blood begins to flow. 2 men in orange clothes with guns look tense. One of them breathes a sigh of relief. A man in an orange kimono with a sword shouts that he will not allow anything to be done. Yoon Hyun quickly fights off 3 attackers in orange robes, one of whom screams in pain as a dagger flies through the air. Several warriors in orange robes run away in panic, one shouting that in front of them is a top-level martial artist. A man in orange stands with a bloody knife, while another kneels and addresses him as broken doors and swords are seen in the room. Yoon Hyun, with blood on his face, suggests going to a famous place, despite visible signs of a fight. Yoon Hyun suggested meeting at a certain place and promised to finish the persecution of the Demon Slayer sect elders. The image shows high mountains with clouds and blue sky, but there are no characters. A man in orange stands on a cliff with a bloody sword and greets Yoon Hyun with a smile, asking what took him so long. Yoon Hyun, out of breath, laughs and says that the other person is too fast for him. The image shows the bloody tip of a sharp blade against a blurred background. Yoon Hyun reflects on how someone used to call it violence, but now the world changes people for survival. Yoon Hyun dreams of returning not to the world of martial arts, but to ordinary life on Earth. Yoon Hyun climbs the rocks with difficulty, thinking that he would like to return to Earth. 2 people walk across a narrow stone bridge to a pagoda with mountains in the background, and one of them says that, "Now we need to do everything possible." Yoon Hyun stands with a sword next to a man lying on the floor, as several men in yellow kneel before them in a burning hall. Yoon Hyun stands with a sword in his hand, looking into the distance as if preparing for an upcoming event. The image shows a traditional Eastern temple with a damaged sign, and below it begins a story about someone finally getting something done. The image shows a man standing in front of an army with a sword in his hand, and he is called the greatest martial artist under heaven. Yoon Hyun recalls that he and director Kim were close like brothers despite their age difference, against the backdrop of a large traditional building in the forest. Yoon Hyun hands over a blue book with a white label without saying a word. Yoon Hyun reads aloud from a book and says that if you master the mountain sword, you can cut down mountains. Yoon Hyun reflects on the dragon vein chi method with surprise, considering it to be a true first-class martial art that is different from second-class techniques. Yoon Hyun falls to the floor, screaming in pain as the wooden stick is ripped from his hands. The man with the staff says thoughtfully that Yoon Hyun is indeed. While he leans on the ground in pain, he clutches his head in panic, thinking that he has no talent. He squeezes the wooden handle with effort, his hand shaking from the tension. Yoon Hyun calmly said that there was nothing to be done, standing with a stick in front of another man in front of traditional buildings. The image shows a large traditional multi-story building in Oriental style against a blue sky with clouds. Yoon Hyun carefully opens the door and looks into the bright room behind it. A man meditates surrounded by glowing blue balls of energy that float around him in a calm atmosphere. Yoon Hyun looks away with a slight smile and seems to have realized or understood something. An old man with white eyes and hair, standing on end, lets out a loud scream, surrounded by a glowing aura. Yoon Hyun concentrates as he releases energy from his hand, while the other white-haired man feels the power engulf his body. Yoon Hyun watches with a slight smile, as another man in a bright glow prepares to attack in the destroyed room. Yoon Hyun anxiously said the name Young, Hoon expressing surprise and concern. Yoon Hyun says something with a slight smile, His face and body part are illuminated by soft light. Yun took off his top, smiling and radiating confidence as energy sparkled around him. Yun confidently replied, "Yes," and the other person chuckled and asked if that was really true. Yun laughs and says the world would be shocked by his skeletal makeover as another man smiles back while taking off his clothes. Yun says the alliance will soon be transitioning to a successor, but no one is suitable for the role due to lack of martial arts skills. Yun, with a slight smile and a drop of sweat on his face, says that there are no geniuses in the world. Yun watches a group of warriors perform battle cries and movements in sync in the training yard. The image shows a traditional multi-story building in Oriental style against a blue sky with clouds. An elderly man in traditional clothing writes with a brush on paper at a table in a room with carved wooden windows. The hand opens the door, and behind the scenes they say that a year after the skeleton was rebuilt, he handed over leadership of the alliance to his successor and left. An elderly man says he wanted to retire with someone, but remained as an alliance strategist to maintain order. With the mountains and traditional building as a backdrop, it is clear that he did not attend the retirement ceremony. A man breathes a sigh of relief as he walks along a stone path in front of a traditional building with a bridge and a pond. Yun comments that it's too quiet and reveals that he bought a mansion with his retirement money, but it's too big for him to live alone. Yun suddenly falls into the bushes in the garden next to the traditional building, causing surprise. A man in black leaning on a sword breathes heavily, and an elderly man in yellow calmly approaches him. Yun, breathing heavily and leaning on his sword, asks in surprise what happened to him and why he didn't come to his retirement ceremony. The man in yellow asks the man lying on the grass in surprise what happened to him, next to whom lies a sword. Yun lies on the grass and says that he truly believes in something important. An elderly man checks Yun lying on the grass and confirms his condition is correct. An elderly man with gray hair and beard laughs and reacts ironically to the word mortal. Yun throws his head back sharply, feeling a strong blow to his chest. Yun and the other two float in the air, watching as the man below is surrounded by bright energy and he notices flying monsters. Two people hover in the air above an ancient temple, heading towards it, with the forest and architecture of the complex visible below. Yun stands by the open window and watches cranes flying over traditional buildings. Yun walks with his sword determinedly, thinking about wanting to fight them one-on-one. Yun lies on the grass and says that finding cultivators was really difficult. Yun, holding a sword, looks up at a figure surrounded by blue light, floating in the air amidst clouds of dust and smoke. The man asked the man lying on the grass if he had won, to which he replied that he had indeed won. An elderly man with a gray beard laughs and says that the leader could cause him a lot of trouble. The image shows a man with a fearful look who touches his face, feeling anxious and tense. The image shows a man with a gray beard expressing surprise and amazement. Against the backdrop of fire, he shows his hand with shining eyes and a smile, implying that this will be his defeat. Yun listens as another man talks about a chi-building stage cultivator, comparing him to the top 10. Yun, with a slight smile and scratches on his face, speaks against the backdrop of a green courtyard and building. The elderly man with the gray beard cried out in amazement. He was overcome with intense shock and alarm. He reflects on how he knew in his past and present lives that cultivators were ridiculous creatures while there were exhausted people lying around. Yun jumps in the air with a sword, destroying the roof of a traditional building. Loud bangs are heard against the backdrop of a destroyed building, and the hero's thoughts say that he is able to cut through entire buildings and steel as if they were made of tofu. Yun reflects on the genius who barely touched the finger of a low-rank cultivator. Yun says they can't run into anything while looking forward with a slight smile. The image shows an elderly man with an anxious expression and a sweaty forehead, clearly worried or frightened. Yun adjusts his collar, preparing for what to do next. Yun, pointing to his injured hand in a reserved manner, ordered it to be cut off. The elderly man began to speak but suddenly stopped, saying, "No." Yun stands with a sword, saying that this is the limit of his martial arts, and another man kneels and asks what he means. Yun covered his face with his hand with a slight smile and said that he would probably start from the very bottom up there. The image shows an elderly man with gray hair and beard who expresses surprise and says that without the spiritual, it is impossible. Yun floats in the air with his eyes closed, surrounded by bright light and energy, as if he is focused on a powerful internal awakening. Yun listens to an old man who says that mortals like them have to use up their entire lives. Yoon clutches a sword with dark energy escaping from it, against a bright sky and a traditional building. Yoon, standing on the ground, gave the command, "Now go," accompanying the words with the appearance of dark energy at his foot. Yoon smiles and hands over the scroll, saying that this is his last gift. An elderly man in traditional clothing holds a scroll and chants a spell from which black smoke and purple light rises. Yoon holds up a book with writing about cultivation and martial arts, talking about trying to use them. An elderly man holding a book exclaims to Yoon, expressing surprise or concern. An elderly man with blood on his face grits his teeth and thinks that the situation is very cruel. An elderly man lies on his bed, coughing up blood and thinking about how he came into this world, but dies of a cold, just like in his past life. Yoon lies in bed under the covers, thinking that a person cannot escape fate no matter how hard they try. There's an old book in the room, and Yoon reflects on living without regrets and being too busy to think about marriage. The empty room says that thanks to this, it was possible to unite the Yangguo martial sex and experience the glory and wealth of the mortal world. The image shows a close-up of a man's face with wrinkles and tears as he muses that if he and Young-hoon had put in more effort, they could have reached the sky. Yoon gritted his teeth in the blood and mentally admitted that his body was shaking from a feeling of powerlessness. He realizes that this is the very forest, the path of ascension. Yoon lies on the grass and reflects that his body is full of energy, so the regression is not a one-time event. The man shouts loudly at Deputy Manager Sai, expressing anger and aggression. Yoon dodged the blow, and his opponent noted this with a tense expression. Yoon reflects on his regression while moving quickly against a natural backdrop. Yoon walks on the grass and thinks that a new body full of energy and a new opportunity is definitely a good thing. The image shows a large traditional Oriental-style building with a high staircase and 2 guard towers on the sides. The man is breathing heavily and screaming, accusing someone of almost killing everyone and now dodging the blow. Yoon watches the other man fall and wonders if this is really a good thing. Yoon ponders over who denies him the meaning of life. The man breathes heavily and says that several regressions can be a useful opportunity. The image shows a skeleton sitting inside a wheel, contemplating how he is trapped in the wheel of fate and doomed to suffer until the end of time. Yoon and another man discuss how he can't meet people from his past life again while watching a line of soldiers. Yoon ponders that the people in front of him are just similar to those he knew in his past life. Watching the 4 people look surprised. The man, remembering Yoon as a brother, tries to calm the choking department head Zhang by saying that he has had enough. Yoon calmly asked what good would come from being angry, and the other, breathing heavily, responded with an insult. Yoon looks forward with a slight smile against the backdrop of blue sky and clouds. Yoon stands calmly while another man breathes heavily, leaning on his knee against a backdrop of a green field and mountains. The man is breathing heavily and speaking tensely, clearly in a stressful situation. Yoon says he'll find a place for them to stay, and the man in the orange jacket looks surprised. 4 people stand together, and one of the women says that they either need a car or a way out of the situation. Yoon, standing in front of nature, says he will light a fire and invites them to come over. The night, starry sky and trees create a calm atmosphere, but Yoon is not visible in this image. Yoon and the others lie around a fire in a cave, relaxing and listening to the quiet sounds coming from the fire. Yoon lies down and contemplates the infinite regression of time, believing that this ability should be eliminated. Yoon reflects on how he keeps coming back to this moment on his path to ascension. Yoon, tired and thoughtful, wonders how he can get home. The image shows an old man with a monocle excitedly discussing how ordinary people could have been caught in spatial storms. Yoon sits on the ground in a dark cave, looking back at something behind him. Yoon clenched his fist and admitted that as a mere mortal he couldn't achieve anything. Yoon is determined to become a cultivator as long as his foot steps on the ground. Yoon explains that by becoming a cultivator, he will be able to extend his life and do research. Yoon stands in a meadow at night, looking up at the sky and appears to be lost in thought. There are clicking sounds in the forest, but Yoon is not visible in the frame. Yoon chews bread with his mouth open, crumbs flying around. Yoon holds the root of the plant and feels strong vibrations of qi in his core. Yoon reflects that he didn't know the heart methods in his previous life, so the yellow bamboo roots wouldn't have helped, but with Yoon's dragon vein qi method, everything will change. Yoon meditates in nature and happily thinks that he can break through blocked energy channels. The image shows a beating heart with blood vessels in the background, creating a sense of life and energy. Yun breathes heavily and reflects on how it's hard for a body soaked in fast food preservatives and stress to heal. The image shows a landscape with dense trees against a backdrop of mountains and a sky with clouds. Yun grips a rock and a wooden stick tightly as he prepares for action on the grass. Yun checks the stick and says that this should be enough. Yun, holding a stick, fights an enemy in the forest, demonstrating agility and focus in battle. Yun focuses on striking with a wooden stick, showing off his fighting skills against the backdrop of green grass. Yun talks about his past life when he was a normal second-level fighter, but didn't practice alongside a master. Against the backdrop of the forest, a calm confirmation sounds. Of course, but Yun himself is not visible in the frame. Yun delivers a powerful blow to a tree with a stick using a move called Severing Mountain Sword. Yun mentally claims that it's all in his head, and that developing his skills is just a matter of time as the rope tightens on the tree. The man in the orange jacket loudly calls out for Manager Seo, while Hyun calmly looks away with a slight smile. Yun stands with a wooden stick by a tree, and another man runs up to him, listening as he explains that you can cut a tree with a wooden stick. Hyun leans against a tree while smiling, and the voiceover says that he will become a mentor on the path to becoming a cultivator. Yun says something with a slight smile against the backdrop of blurred trees. The image shows a man with a happy expression saying something against a natural backdrop. The image shows a sinister laugh, followed by large claws slamming into the ground with force. The scene shows the open mouth of a beast who contemptuously calls people dirty. Yun stands with a stick in front of a huge, angry wolf with red eyes who growls menacingly, warning him not to play with him. Yun confirms with a slight smile, and the other man remembers the master of the forest and admits that he forgot about him. Against the backdrop of the forest, splashes of blood are visible, flying across branches and leaves. The image shows a blurry and scary mouth with sharp teeth, accompanied by sound effects that create an atmosphere of horror and tension. Yun presses on a nerve to ease the pain of a fox bite, squeezing his hand to his chest in concentration. Yun holds back the pain and tension, blood dripping from his face, reflecting the internal struggle and determination. The crowd screams in shock at Deputy Manager Seo as he confidently strides forward. Yun confidently walks towards the wolf with red eyes who is looking at him angrily. Yun stands in front of a group of people and a large creature with tails, thinking about his vow to become a cultivator by reaching the 5 energies level. Yun reflects on how despite training under the best master for over 100 years, he barely managed to become a top-notch fighter. Yun screams in pain, clutching his chest despite what's happening. Several people are in shock and screaming for Manager, so expressing great fear and anxiety. Yun, wounded and with blood on his hand, calmly says that he is ready to wait even for 1,000 years for his goal. Yun, with blood on his face and a determined look, says he won't give up. The image shows a close-up of the wolf's face with bright red eyes, its tongue sticking out and licking its nose. Yun, with a bloody hand, offers to give it to the wolf with red eyes, who asks why they have no taste. Yun, wounded in the arm, watches as the fox takes off into the sky, leaving them behind. Yun continues to swing his sword alone in the forest, despite the wound on his arm. Yun watches as several figures fly away into the night sky, and he and the other man watch them go, wondering about their colleagues being kidnapped. Hyun, injured and holding a stick, moves abruptly at night under the moonlight in the forest. Hyun, with a bloody wound on his arm, folds his hands in concentration, preparing for action on the 4th day. The image shows a character with blue hair and horns, smiling and saying something against a dark background. Yun holds the woman in his arms as the injured man explains that she is a mortal with no spiritual root and that normal mortals don't live long. Yun calmly holds the woman in his arms and assures her that she has nothing to worry about. Yun asks for a chance, explaining that he and she are from the same country. Yun clutches his injured shoulder, trying hard to hold back the pain and not fall to his knees. Yun steps forward as 2 people watch in the background as a man holds his back in pain. The image shows a man with green eyes and long blonde hair smiling and looking away. The sky is torn apart by lightning and thunder during a severe thunderstorm, creating a tense atmosphere. Yun stands in the rain and looks at a blue dragon that appears against a stormy sky with lightning. The image shows a bright sunny sky with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves on the green trees. The 2 kneel before the old man, who, leaning on his staff, addresses them with respect. An elderly man with long gray hair cheerfully explains that a mortal can gain the ability to develop spiritual senses by holding a glowing ball in his hand. Yun, surprised, realized that there were other ways to become a cultivator. The image shows an elderly man with a staff threateningly touching the face of a kneeling woman while uttering words about the spiritual root. Yun creates a vortex that sucks the two men into a whirlpool, after which he declares that he has no more dealings with them. The woman begs him to stop, shouting, "Wait! Yun! No!" as the old man watches the ring of fire around them. Yun's eyes snapped open, expressing sudden awakening or alertness. Yun, hanging on a tree branch, thoughtfully says that it is. Yun stands with his back turned and looks at the landscape with ancient buildings among the greenery under the clear sky. Yun stands over a lying man in the forest and reflects on his past life and travels with Yang-hoon and Yang-guo. A man lies on the grass and reflects that after nearly 100 years of traveling around Yang-guo, he knows every place like the palm of his hand. Then he reacts with interest to something. The image shows a clear blue sky with white clouds and green treetops. The character Yun is missing. Yun explained the situation to the man he brought to the nearest town, who looked rather puzzled. A traditional building in Hobak is shown as a tranquil setting, likely selling herbs. Yun and another man stand opposite each other with swords in hand in the training yard, preparing for a fight. Yun stands with his arms crossed and remains silent, expressing calm and a slight smile. Yun meditates while surrounded by 3 glowing blue flowers, reaching the level of 3 flowers in a short time. Yun muses on how someone like him could spend 2 lifetimes training and barely reach level 1. The man happily says he can now win, clenching his fists and laughing. Yun thinks with a slight smile that this person is not the Young-hoon he thought was his brother in his past life. Yun thinks he's much older mentally, and the man with his hands up exclaims that he feels full of energy. In his thoughts, the character admits that he should not accompany another person in this life. Yun shows the book and is surprised, saying, "What?" The man anxiously asks Seo Yun if he did something wrong. Yun says to himself intently that the reason. Yun reveals that in his first regression, Yonhuan became the leader of a fighting alliance, but fell into despair after being defeated by cultivators. The image shows a man with a fire seal in his hand talking about his achievements in martial arts, while another with a sword prepares to attack. A man tells that someone who couldn't surpass strong cultivators gave up and left the path of martial arts to become a cultivator. Yun clenches his teeth and cries, feeling strong emotions. Yun explained to the interviewer that he wanted to travel the lands and improve his skills. Yun says he taught his interlocutor how to communicate, write, and fight while in a room with guns and books. A man speaks with anxiety about having to part with someone who shares his homeland. Yun, with a slight smile, suggested to meet on this day in this house. Yun thoughtfully said, as he looked at the traditional building with the mountains and trees in the background. A man with a spear shouts for him to stop and asks what brings his interlocutor to the Hall of 8 Honors. Yun, with his hands folded, calmly stated that he came for a specific purpose against the backdrop of a busy street with passers-by. The warriors in red robes point out that it is impermissible to break into the Hall of 8 Honors, while one of them loudly objects. A man in red holding a spear reacts sharply to the sudden attack, while Yun prepares for battle by grabbing the hilt of his sword. The man in red looks at the broken weapon in fear, and Yun calmly pulls out his sword and starts talking. Yun says with a slight smile that something still feels familiar. The image shows a traditional Eastern temple against a backdrop of mountains and sky with no visible characters. She talks about the sect in a friendly manner, inviting you to come in and look around the premises. Yun walks down the hallway next to a woman in a long dress, their footsteps echoing in the empty room. Yun stands in front of a traditional building, watching the scene as people in yellow clothes gather around him. Several men in yellow robes watch the proceedings from different levels of a wooden stand against a backdrop of green trees and a blue sky. The man with the beard smiles and says that he didn't expect everything to be like this. Yun greets the leader of the 8 Respect sect and notes that his QI is undoubtedly strong. Yun smiled and made a gesture with his hands and asked for something, making a polite request. Yun confidently twirls his staff, showing off his skill against the backdrop of a traditional building and clear sky. Yun and another man fight with swords in the training room, with the latter decisively declaring that he will make the next move. A man with a gun in his hands quickly jumps forward, destroying a wooden structure in his path. The image shows a metal chain with a blue glow flying at high speed. Yoon charges forward, striking the enemy with a sharp weapon, causing them to be greatly surprised. Yoon quickly deflects the nunchuck attack, showing agility and focus. Several men in yellow robes watch the scene tensely. One of them exclaims that someone has repelled the attack of the sect leader. Yoon notes that the opponent has reached the late stage of rank 1, demonstrating swordsmanship. Yoon smilingly shows off nunchucks at an outdoor training ground. Onyeon calls someone a genius with a slight smile on his face. Several men in yellow kimonos discuss how the level of skill they have achieved in their late 20s is not as impressive as it seems. Yoon, smiling, holds a sword and says that he is just one of the many talentless fools that can often be found in the world and was not given talent by fate. Yoon reflects on how, despite his lack of talent, he managed to develop genius-level fighting skills. Yoon decides to act like a genius and use the sword's energy, and the other man replies that he will do the same. Yoon performs a swift sword strike using the severing sword first form, transcending peaks technique on the training ground. A man with a beard and a bun delivers a powerful blow with nunchucks in an open area. Yoon charges at the enemy with a chain weapon, demonstrating the second form of the martial art, entering the mountain. Yoon activates the move third form, ascending vein, by attacking the enemy with a chain in his hand. A man with glowing eyes and black marks on his face attacks, swinging a bladed chain surrounded by blue flames. Yoon charges at his opponents with powerful sword strikes that knock them off balance. A man with a mustache and beard swings his sword in rage, amazed at its incredible strength and the impossibility of breaking through it. Yoon quickly attacks the man with a gun, who screams from the blow. Yoon attacks with a swift attack using the technique mountain-breaking sword, 7th form, deep mountain. The man is horrified to see the blow leave a bloody wound near his ear, expressing shock and pain. Several men in yellow robes are shocked. One of them exclaims that the leader of the sect is someone incredible. Yoon delivers a powerful sword strike, causing an explosion and destroying the floor in front of the opponent in battle. Several men in yellow robes discuss the speed and power of the sword, noting that it is becoming incredibly powerful. Yoon fights the enemy, their weapons colliding with a bright flash of energy. A man with a mustache and a wound on his face swings his nunchucks furiously, making a striking sound and expressing pain. Yoon firmly stated that he would put an end to this, looking forward with a serious expression. A man with nunchucks looks up to see Yoon falling from a height, accompanied by the caption, 7 lights emerging peak. Yoon jumps with a sword in his hands, surrounded by bright flashes and debris in the sky. A man with a determined expression breaks a metal chain, demonstrating strength and rage in the moment of action. 3 men in yellow robes look forward with surprise and tension, sweating and expressing anxiety. Yoon attacks the man with force, who screams and holds his arm as dust rises and metal chains fly around them. Yoon stands with his hands folded in a gesture against the backdrop of a traditional building, preparing for action with a slight smile on his face. In the arena after the fight, 2 men stand on the destroyed ground, while spectators in yellow watch them from the stands. Against the backdrop of a traditional building under a clear sky, a scene with no visible characters, the crowd watches the man in black as he calmly walks forward, thinking there is no reaction. Yoon reflects on the sect's strict moral code, causing surprise among passers-by, and resolves to visit unorthodox sects next time. Yoon is determined to think about his plans and talks about traveling with people and traditional buildings in the background. The image shows a green mountain landscape with bright sunlight, with Yoon's character missing from the frame. Yoon stands with a sword in front of the Huiyan sect building, with smoke and wind swirling around him. Shown is the Hoer sect building, surrounded by greenery and mountains, with an inscription indicating its name. Yoon quickly parries the attack, knocking the gold item out of his opponent's hands, causing him to cry out in pain. A man in white sits in a chair in surprise as he watches another man fall backwards with force onto the floor. A man lies on the floor with his eyes closed and his mouth open, groaning in pain. An elderly man laughs and talks about the difficult duels around Seokyeong City. Yoon noted that the conversational skills of the other person are good while he is lying on the floor, and the old man in traditional clothes is sitting in a chair opposite him. The old man with white hair announced that it was time to fight the 10 elders who were standing menacingly behind him. Yoon said with a slight smile that he thought the duel ended in his victory. The elderly man asks with a smile if the interlocutor really heard about this. Yoon warns with a slight smile that if he reveals someone's devious actions, the consequences will be severe. A group of men in kimonos insist that their sex duel will only result in a simple scratch, but warns that it could become infected. An elderly man in traditional clothing sits in a chair with a smile and a relaxed posture, expressing confidence and calmness. Yun stands surrounded by armed monks while a seated man smirks and says, "Ho ho," foreshadowing danger. Yun subtly thinks about someone that they are even crazier. Yun thoughtfully noted to himself that they were even crazier. Yun stands surrounded by armed monks, while an old man watches from a high place, preparing for a possible conflict. Yun explains that this is the reason he came here. Yun, holding a sword, prepares for battle with armed opponents standing behind him. Yun is surrounded by 6 armed monks who attack him with fury and determination. At night, loud laughter echoes through the traditional building, creating an atmosphere of lively fun. Inside the decorated building, a man with a beard laughs loudly, while in the background, 2 people talk quietly. 2 men at a table discuss an unfortunate outcome for a talented opponent, one expressing regret and the other agreeing with him. The older man raises his cup with a smile and says that there is a naivety in youth that makes you think differently. The man at the table says that the Hoyun sect can't be called a sect, it's a gang, and that someone has probably already been buried. A stained boot is visible on the floor on which someone steps. He exclaimed in surprise, noticing something unexpected in the hall with its traditional interior and people in historical clothing. Yun, covered in blood and breathing heavily, calmly asks for 1 bowl of noodles. In a busy room, a waiter agrees with a smile, while the diners at the table look at him in surprise. Yun, with a bloody face and his hand on his sword, enters the hall where several people are sitting at tables, and everyone turns their attention to him. Yun, covered in blood and with a serious expression, admits that he almost died. Yun breathes heavily and says that there were 10 people against him who also poisoned their weapons. Yun stands among the fallen enemies and reflects that thanks to his medical knowledge and the medicine he had prepared in advance, he was able to survive. The old man furiously orders someone to be killed, talking about every member of the cult. A group of armed men in purple furiously raise their spears and bows and rush to attack as the enemy's last hope. In a dark hall, a man with black hair fights fiercely and injures several opponents in purple clothes, thinking that he fought like an animal to survive. In a tavern, 3 men are eating and drinking. One of them looks around warily. Yun stabbed an enemy sitting on the steps with a knife, while fallen fighters in blue lay around. A hand with bloody scratches places the chopsticks into an empty bowl, and he thinks to himself, starting with the word, "anyway." Yun, covered in blood, thinks that an overdose of stimulants is keeping him from relaxing, and he won't be able to sleep for days. Yun, with bloody wounds on his arm, tightly grips the sheath of his sword and resolutely declares that he will challenge the Orthodox sect to a duel. Yun, bloodied and with a gun in his hand, leaves the room where 2 men are watching him while sitting at a table with food and drinks. Several men in traditional dress listen in amazement as he tells how his name has become known throughout the city thanks to his ridiculous act. Yun takes on an opponent in a night fight, showing off incredible speed and strength with a voiceover saying he'll soon be called a crazy martial artist. Yun holds the sword with effort and exclaims about his endless fighting spirit. Yun stares ahead with concentration, scratches and blood visible on his face. Hyun, despite the wound on his back, continues to fight resolutely, thinking about the need to move forward through life and death. The man with the sword says that without talent, a person would have to be crazy to break through the wall and charges into battle against the 2 attackers. Shown is a night view of the city of Yangguo, where numerous fights between Orthodox and unorthodox sects take place. A loud explosion, accompanied by flying rocks and dust, is heard against the backdrop of a traditional building. Yun flies into the air with a sword in hand, creating a powerful explosion of energy against the backdrop of the sky and mountains. Hyun holds the glowing sword tightly, making a sound like shoo. Yun explains with difficulty that the silk-like chi sword is only available to those who have reached the top, and trying to use it puts a lot of strain on the head. Yun thinks with tension and determination that if he doesn't do this, he won't be able to even dream of catching up. Yun noticed the enemy jumping at him with his sword raised, preparing to attack. Yun deflects the sword strike, creating a bright flash of light at the moment of impact. The image shows a powerful explosion near a wall against a blue sky and mountains with no visible characters. Yun, lying among the rubble, painfully realizes that all of his sword energy was destroyed in one blow. Yoon appears from the smoke and tells the other person that they still have a long way to go, wishing them an endless struggle. Yoon said with a slight smile that he thought he won this time. He rises from the ground with difficulty, holding a sword, and someone thinks that he has incredible talent. Yoon noted that the interviewee had become stronger in a year and also mentioned the restructuring of the skeleton in 5 years. Yoon holds a sword and ponders what he's been doing all this time, claiming that he remains a top-notch martial artist. Yoon looks ahead carefully, concentrating on assessing the situation. Against the backdrop of a traditional building, the question of why he is here is raised and a reminder of their previous agreement. Yoon reflects on the 5 energies converging to the origin and visiting the great Yangguo sects, and realizes one important thing. Yoon raised his finger with a serious expression and declared that no one could stand up to all of Yangguo. Yoon, crossing his arms, silently expressed his displeasure and began to think out loud. Yoon suggested creating a cult and invited him to join, but the other person declined, saying that he preferred to remain as he was now. Yoon and another man discussed the organization, with the former explaining its structure and the latter listening intently. Yoon thoughtfully says he received many teachings from his past life. Yoon grips the hilt of his sword tightly and says that he needs real-life experience now. Yoon recalls that in his past life, Young-hoon told him to aim for maximum real-life combat experience in the late stages of rank 1. Yoon stands at the stairs of a traditional building and reflects on life, choosing to simply observe. Yoon walks confidently across the grass, holding a sword in one hand and a bag over his shoulder in the other, heading towards the building in the background. Yoon stands at the foot of the stairs in front of an old building on a rainy day, observing the facade and surroundings. Yoon stands at the door in the rain with a slight smile as another man looks at him from inside the room. Yoon looks down thoughtfully, his face expressing deep concentration and slight sadness. Yoon sits with a sword in his hands and says that he is still not finished, addressing the person standing in front of him. Yoon holds the sword confidently and says that his understanding of sword energy is now much greater than before. Yoon touches his chin thoughtfully and quietly says, Yoon notices that despite his sword skills, the other guy hasn't reached his combat peak yet. Yoon smiles tensely, the sweat on his face betraying his nervousness despite his attempt to remain calm. A man with a bloody nose and beads of sweat on his face looks tense and worried. Yoon, with a tense expression and a bloody nose, grips the sword and says that maybe in half a day he will be able to hold the sword. Yoon holds out the book in his hand and prepares to say something. Yoon thoughtfully reads a book and talks about being a cultivator. Yoon looks at the thick book and thinks that it is as thick as an advanced version of another martial arts book. Yoon stands in the doorway with thunder and lightning in the background, calling it a disaster. Yoon talks about passing on knowledge to the next generation and gives thanks for it. Yoon stands at the entrance of the building with a sword in his hands, hoping to meet another cultivator in the formation stage. Yoon says something serious amidst the rain and thunderstorm, expressing determination and tension. Yoon says with surprise and alarm that each part is spatial. Yoon explains that weapons should be used during duels or real fights. Yoon says with a tense expression that maintaining the sword energy all day already makes his head hurt, and now he has to constantly simulate the environment. He wonders if Yoon is sure his head won't explode. Yoon stands with his back to the viewer by the open door and begins to speak, saying the word no. Lightning flashes from the sky, illuminating the gloomy mountains and forest. And from this moment, a new story begins. Yoon walks down a busy street with many people in traditional clothing against a backdrop of a pagoda and decorations. There are sounds in the forest that create the feeling of fast movement or falling, but Yoon is not visible in the frame. Yoon sighs heavily as he stands with his sword in his hand in the middle of the forest, feeling tense and ready to fight. Yoon, sweating and breathing heavily, admitted that he felt dizzy from the awareness of everything that entered his field of vision. With a forest backdrop, Yoon notes that he also tracks audible informations. Yoon thinks with a tense look that there are no more sects left to fight against. Yoon reflects that there is no more sect left in Yangguo that he can visit. Yoon walks among the defeated bandits, noting that he now lives off their rewards. Yoon lies on the grass and wonders if he can survive fighting enemies who use dirty methods while he is weakened. Yoon calmly stated that he had chosen this path, while the other man with the sword exclaimed that he had finally found it. Against the backdrop of a forest, a man with a beard and 2 swords threatens his enemies, declaring that they are dead and his comrades stand behind him. The man says resolutely that even if he dies, he must continue on this path, surrounded by armed men in the clearing. From the forest come cries of pain and sounds of struggle, accompanied by splashes of blood against a backdrop of greenery and blue sky. The image shows a man with a beard who begins to speak, but his words are not visible. The image shows a man with scars smiling and beginning to speak, saying the word once. The man pours tea and explains that 45 years have passed since his regression, and now he can process and remember information with all his senses at an advanced level. There is a cup of hot drink on the table, and the thought sounds that this is where it all ends. The image shows an elderly man with a gray beard and scars, looking down with a slight smile without saying a word. The image shows a man with orange eyes shouting, "Stop and stop!" Yun says that a bounty has been placed on him and mentions 2 main formation stage cultivators. A man with gray hair and tattoos on his face sits at a table with a cup in his hand and starts talking. Yun picks up a wooden cup from the table, accompanying the action with a slight smile. A man with a scar on his face looks up thoughtfully and begins to talk about the events that happened recently. He muses out loud that he sees himself in Kim Young-hoon. Yun reflects on talents, noting that he has a gift that was rejected by heaven while the other person has a talent given from above. Yun and another man sit at a table, discussing how they are polar opposites in talent. An elderly man with a tattoo on his face holds a cup and says this is the next level. On a dark night street, Yun stands among the trees with a slight smile, observing the surrounding silence. Loud explosions and gunshots are heard above the trees at night. An elderly man with a sword screams in pain and asks what the problem is. A man in black with a sword says he was supposed to be a martial artist, while an older man with a beard coughs up blood in his mouth. The image shows an old man with wounds on his face and hands who looks scared and is probably trying to explain or justify something. Yun thoughtfully says that maybe he's missing something important. Yun asks about the catalyst, and the other man explains that it is a strong sense of will or emotion. The man screams furiously, indignant that he has dedicated his entire life to wielding a sword and does not understand what they mean. The image shows a close-up of an eye with tears streaming down it, and the character emotionally says that he has struggled all his life and has no shortage of despair. The man fights holding a sword and bitterly tells that he has activated all the chi flows in his body, and even in his sleep, he retains the energy of the sword, remembering information from his dreams. A man lies on the ground and screams in despair, demanding that the heavens show him the next step. A 70-year-old man lies on the ground in the forest and reflects on what it looks like to be cursed by heaven for his fate at his age. An elderly man with tears in his eyes says that he has dedicated his whole life to the sword and with difficulty clenches his fist, expressing pain and despair. Yun stands with a sword in his hand and looks at the man with white hair who is lying on the ground next to the fallen sword. Yun stands with his back to the tree as eddies swirl around it, causing sparks and crackling sounds. The image shows a burning tree with cracks from which light comes out, with no characters visible. An elderly man with a sword on his knees recounts the names of the martial arts, Mountain Lord martial arts, and Transcending Peak steps in amazement. Yun stands in the courtyard of a traditional building against the backdrop of vibrant autumn foliage and mountains. An elderly man with a white beard holds a sword and says that 50 years have passed since his regression. An elderly man with a sword asks if his interlocutor is going to leave now. An elderly man with a white beard says that the talent of the interlocutor is running out. Yun watches a man with white hair say that the heavens are against them while holding swords. Yun, wounded and with blood on his face, groans with difficulty and pain, expressing his indignation at what is happening. An elderly man in shock says the situation is serious, while another asks for medical instruments. An elderly man with a white beard turns around sharply, expressing surprise. 2 people, including Yun, are launched into the air, causing a powerful explosion and raising dust and debris around them. The old man exclaims in surprise, noticing that the guy flying next to him has both of his arms cut off. Someone warns Yun about a cultivator chasing them, and he explains that this is the price for the core formation stage cultivator's hand exploding. A man with blood on his face screams that he, Kim Young-hoon, has dealt serious damage to a formation core stage cultivator. He realizes with blood on his face, with surprise and laughter, that he is seeing the final stage that a fighter can reach. The image shows an elderly man with a white beard looking up with an expression of shock and fear. The wounded man screams that he risked his life and exhausted his strength to reach this moment, pointing to a glowing ball of energy in the sky. The elderly man exclaims in amazement that this is improved chi. Against the backdrop of forest and mountains, a bright blue energy blast rapidly falls down, creating a sense of powerful force. The building collapses, debris falls down with a loud roar. Two men watch a huge explosion. One of them exclaims Yoon-hyun's name, while the other says that this is the result of his life's work. An elderly man with a white beard and gray hair sighs and says, "Ah," against a blue sky. The ruined house burns and collapses, and in the thoughts it is said that here for 50 years an endless fighting spirit lived. Yoon-hyun, with blood on his face, exclaims with delight that he ran far and wide to show something important. An elderly man with white beard and hair looks forward with a serious expression against a blue sky. The backdrop of traditional buildings suggests something exploded without leaving a trace. Yoon-hyun noted that it was good that there were no servants in the house, otherwise hundreds of them would have died in one attack. Yoon-hyun ponders the blade marks in the ruins and realizes that the ball of enhanced ki was a concentration of thousands of blade energies. Two people fall from a height, one of them holds a staff, both look scared. Yoon-hyun thinks this is stronger than any martial art he's seen so far. He, with blood on his face, says something about the cultivator's hand with a slight smile. A man screams that someone is falling as two people plummet through autumn trees. Explosion devastates forest, sending dust and debris into the air among autumn trees. The image shows a forest where rocks are falling and dust is rising, creating an atmosphere of destruction or collapse. A large crater has formed in the forest after the explosion, with dust and smoke rising around it, but Yoon-hyun is not yet visible. Yoon-hyun, badly injured and lying on the ground, asks to pass on his martial arts to future generations. An elderly man yells at someone lying on the ground to stop talking against a backdrop of autumn trees. Yoon-hyun stands on a tree branch and remarks that it is a terrible place to run while another man looks down at him. Yoon-hyun stated with a serious expression that this man was a criminal who had committed unimaginable crimes against cultivators. An elderly man with a gray beard asks if they are going to punish someone. Yoon-hyun quickly carries another person on his back, rushing along the ground at high speed. Yoon-hyun stands on a tree branch and watches the two men walk away along an autumn path, thinking that their actions are meaningless. Yoon-hyun stands on a tree branch surrounded by purple smoke and autumn leaves, preparing for action. Yoon-hyun suddenly grabs the man with gray hair, who tries to say something in horror. Yoon-hyun stands on a tree, watching a crowd of living dead people with talismans on their faces, making angry sounds and making him wonder. The image shows 4 zombies with glowing eyes and distorted faces, emitting a piercing scream. A group of people run after a fugitive who exclaims that he is too old for this. Yoon-hyun asks if the cultivators have given the name Fighting Spirit, remarking on how unusual it is as they run through the forest, breathing heavily. An elderly man with a white beard breathes heavily and says that 2 martial spirits are being pursued by Dronzer. Yoon-hyun, breathing heavily and carrying the other on his back, demands that he stay awake and say something as they are chased by their pursuers. A frightened man with a distorted face screams and rushes forward. An old man with white hair and a beard deals a fatal blow to a man with dark hair, causing blood to spurt. The image shows the moment the shoe hits the body, but Yoon-hyun's character is not visible. A crowd of masked men fight, and one of them gets shot in the leg. Blood spurts out. Yoon-hyun runs through the forest carrying another man on his back, who says he's going to die from exhaustion soon. Yoon-hyun bit hard and continued to run, hearing screams and sounds of pursuit around him. A close-up shot of legs running along the ground, while in the distance, a group of people in dark clothing watch the action. He breathes heavily, intermittent breaths coming out of his mouth. Yoon-hyun stands on the edge of a tall cliff and notices a group of people climbing up, commenting on the height. Yoon-hyun floats in the air, watching the evil Dronzer, who are surprised that a mere human could endure them for 3 days and nights. Yoon-hyun says that running away is no longer possible and pointless. An old man breathes heavily as he carries a man with dark wavy hair on his back, who says that the fighting spirit is already dead. Yoon-hyun calmly says he is a doctor while sitting on the edge of a high cliff, while several people watch him from above. Yoon-hyun says with a slight smile that he is only interested in the highest fighting spirit. The image shows a man with gray hair and a beard, laughing weakly while saying, "Ha ha ha." Yoon-hyun starts to speak, but his words are not fully visible in the image. Yun recalls the techniques and methods he mastered as he slowly draws his sword from its sheath. Yun reveals that the man is from his hometown and is his martial arts instructor. The old man with the sword menacingly declared that if they wanted to kill his master, they would have to kill him first. Yun stands in the darkness with a slight smile, his face partially hidden in shadow against the gloomy sky. Against a purple-lit night sky, reanimated zombies with severed arms scream distortedly as a voiceover begins to speak of ignorance. Yun floats in the air, surrounded by giant hands, while evil creatures with white eyes scream distortedly at him. Yun stands in the distance, and huge hands appear in front of him, as if trying to grab someone. An elderly man with a white beard turned around abruptly, noticing something unexpected. He thinks with a tense look that they are not chasing him. He dropped to his knees, raising his hands and making sharp sounds, expressing strong emotions. An old man holding a sword says something in horror, while a muscular figure is seen in the foreground, and Hyun in a blue kimono is standing in the background. Yun looks at him half-eyed and says something with a slight smile on his face. Yun warns with a slight smile that he will make someone pay for neglecting a farmer. The image shows an old man with a white beard and hair getting angry and calling someone a villain. Hyun holds his sword tightly with a tense expression, making a KRRR sound as he prepares to fight. The image shows a man with a scratched face who makes a loud roar, expressing rage or pain. Hyun delivers a powerful sword strike to his old opponent, who tries to defend himself and screams in pain. A man with a white beard is outraged at the sight of a crowd of zombies and asks if this could be the legacy of the dead, while another in a blue cloak watches from above. Hyun looks forward with a slight smile against the backdrop of the night sky, radiating calm and confidence. Yun fights his opponent, thinking to himself that he doesn't know how to use martial arts. Hyun reflects an attack from an enemy who uses the power of a cultivator to attack him. The opponent barely acknowledges the power and speed of the blow, noting that his old body is having a hard time withstanding it as he and Hyun fight with swords. An old man with a beard fights fiercely, raising his sword to strike. Yun thinks it's an incredible shame to point a sword at Kim Yong-hoon, who is already dead. An elderly man with a beard says decisively that if nothing else can be done, he must finish it as soon as possible. An elderly man in traditional clothing activates mystical power while holding a sword and staff surrounded by glowing purple energies. Yun says something with a slight smile while looking ahead against the backdrop of a sky with clouds. Yun said, with a slight smile and surprise, turning his attention to the other person. Hyun and another man are lying on the grass next to swords. He is surprised, and the other is relaxedly exhaling smoke. Yun said with a smile that there is a lake there, similar to the lake at Baekdu Mountain. Hyun stands by a lake in the mountains under a clear sky. A loud sound is heard, attracting his attention. An elderly man with a sword reflects on the symbolism of heaven in sword teachings, linking it to the enemy he is fighting. A man with a sword menacingly attacks another, who prepares to strike back and contemplates his only attack. The image shows a man in tattered clothes who is screaming and appears to be surrounded by a whirlwind of energy or power. The older man explains that his technique absorbs the opponent's energy and launches the enemy away, trapping it in his sword. Yun explains that he can use this technique because he is a top-notch doctor and master of the 8 QI meridians, and this fighting style is created specifically for him. An angry man growls and says he must not leave a single piece of his enemy, while another calmly watches from above. Hyun uses the energy within his sheath with concentration to combine all of the sword's forms into a single strike. The image depicts an old man with a sword who delivers a powerful blow, creating a vortex of energy around himself. The man delivers a powerful blow with his sword, creating a glowing slash in the air as if opening a passage into the mountain. The man performs a powerful sword strike, causing a destructive wave of energy and a destructive effect around him. A man screams in pain as sharp blades pierce his body, tearing his clothes and causing him to bleed. The old man with the white beard says decisively that he will completely dismember the enemy so that the cultivators will not desecrate his legacy by controlling the body. A man screams furiously, accusing his interlocutor of being an insect. Yun stands in front of a huge screaming monster that is emitting dark energy and preparing to attack. The older man with the beard realizes that the cultivator has given the enemy more strength and speed and knows that he needs to dodge. A man with a distorted face screams that his life is about to end and he is already dead, so he is going to use this moment. Yoon powerfully kicked the ground, causing destruction and an explosion. Yoon rushes forward, ordering everything around to be burned. The image shows a huge, muscular man shouting and raising his hand, preparing to strike. The man says with determination that he cannot die and must hold on a little longer. Yoon clenches his fist, feeling the wetness, the temperature, and the blood on the tip of his tongue. Yoon feels like his brain is about to explode from the stress. The old man with burning eyes screams, demanding more, and swings his sword. The image shows a destruction or explosion effect with red and black cracks, with no visible characters. The image shows a large face of an elderly man with wide open eyes and an expression of surprise or shock. A man with white hair rises into the air holding a long object in his hand, preparing to attack or defend. An elderly man with a frightened expression on his face tries to understand what is happening, saying to himself, "This." Yoon confidently deflects the giant hand's attack, pointing his sword at the enemy despite the danger. Yoon runs towards the huge monster, preparing to attack. An old man with a white beard and a sword in his hand stands in the darkness, preparing for battle, his gaze serious and focused. The image shows 3 tall light columns against a dark sky with a blue line and the sounds of sleep. Yoon delivers a powerful sword strike to the neck of the huge monster, causing it to scream in pain and spit out blood. Yoon wonders if this could be a vision of a martial artist who has reached the pinnacle. Wounded man with scars on his face smiles, and someone is surprised that Kim Yong-hoon is smiling. Yoon quickly attacks the giant enemy with his sword, striking his arm. A huge creature with blood on its face prepares to attack, while 2 men, one with a sword, the other floating in the air, watch it under the moon. On a red background, silhouettes are fighting. One of them hits the other hard. Blood flies and the sounds of blows are heard. The image shows the moment of a powerful blow to the head, accompanied by blood, and the text talks about 2 men who have struggled with their fate all their lives. A wounded man with white hair holds a sword and warns that one is already dead and the other is about to die. Yoon shows off his strength with a smile, creating a double image effect against the dark sky. Yoon lands hard on the ground, causing an explosion of dust and rocks. He rises into the air with his sword in hand, preparing for a powerful attack in the stormy night. The image shows a powerful explosion with dust and debris rising, with no characters visible. Yoon watches the destruction and quietly admits that this is the end. The man screams with rage, his voice loud and shrill under the rain and falling rocks. A man with white hair and a beard suddenly descends, swinging his sword and destroying the ground around him. Yoon moves as he can no longer identify a person's body. An elderly man with a white beard bids farewell to a martial arts master, wishing him peace. Yoon lies on the grass and reveals that he regressed to his past life again. Yoon clenched her fist against the green grass, expressing determination or tension. Yoon clenches his fist and happily exclaims that he has finally achieved his goal. The man yells at Yoon, blaming him for what happened and calling him crazy while he calmly listens. Yoon said with a slight smile that he can see it while looking forward carefully. Yoon confidently dodged the punch that the other man threw with rage on his face. Yoon is concentrating on where John Myung-hoon will strike next. Yoon reflects on how he used to be able to dodge attacks with his eyes closed thanks to experience and predicting the trajectory of punches while he deflects an opponent's attack. The man tensely explains that this is not a prediction, but rather a premonition, pointing his hand forward. Yoon stands with a sword among the defeated enemies, and below it is explained that they see the trajectory and direction of attacks of those weaker than themselves. Yoon looks ahead with concentration and thinks to himself that this time will be different. The man concentrates on feeling the blue lines that show him the enemy's weak points and the best trajectories for attack. Yoon explains that the red lines help read the enemy's attacks, while the blue lines provide other information. A man with a tense expression says he sees many opportunities to attack. Yoon was surprised to see his nose bleed and quietly said, "Huh?" Yoon grabbed his head in intense pain and thought his brain was on fire from the overload of the vision. Yoon, dodging the blow, hears the enemy getting angry that he almost killed everyone and dared to avoid his blows. He jerked his head back, sweating and opening his mouth as if trying to avoid a blow. Yoon is lying on the grass and several people are rushing towards him. One of them calls for the department head John. Yoon stands in nature, holding his head and appears to be in great anxiety or pain. The man asked Yoon if she was okay as she walked forward, while another man watched from behind. Yoon, lost in thought and wiping away his sweat, reflects on the unexpected pain after using something for a short time and tries to figure out the cause of the problem. Yoon-hyun says, trying to calm the man down as he holds his head while the others listen attentively and support him. A cave is shown in the greenery, and the lyrics say that Yoon-hyun lit a fire inside and let something drift. 5 people are lying around a fire in a cave, all unconscious or asleep. The atmosphere is tense and disturbing. Night, sky with clouds, silhouettes of trees are visible in the foreground. Characters are absent. Yoon-hyun vigorously swings a stick in the night forest, cutting a flying leaf. Yoon-hyun shows off how he cut a leaf in half with a blunt branch without using chi with a slight smile. Yoon-hyun speculates that by using this vision, he will be able to predict all of his opponent's moves and target their weak points with optimal movements. Yoon-hyun reflects on why Kim Young-hoon called it memory of all 5 senses as a reproduction of a martial artist's vision. Yoon-hyun revealed that he was forced to enhance his 5 senses and manually calculate the enemy's trajectory. The image shows glowing lines coming from the branch and leaves floating in the air. And Yoon-hyun thinks Marshall Peak's vision is truly incredible. Under the night sky with a full moon, the wind rustles through the trees, creating an atmosphere of calm and solitude. Yoon-hyun stands in the forest with a stick in his hand, leaves swirling around him, creating a tense atmosphere. Several warriors in green robes attack furiously, shouting and waving weapons in the dark space. Yoon-hyun deflects his opponent's sword with a stick, creating a vortex of leaves in the night forest. Yoon-hyun quickly fights off a group of armed opponents, landing blows and forcing them to retreat. 3 men in green robes are fighting. One of them is shouting, expressing rage and determination. Against the backdrop of the sunset in the forest, a sigh is heard, expressing fatigue or relief. Yoon-hyun, out of breath with a slight smile on his face, says, "Now." Against the backdrop of the evening sky and trees, Yoon-hyun stands in a meadow at night with a stick in his hand, surrounded by falling leaves under the light of the full moon. Yoon-hyun holds his head in his hand and says his brain is about to burn out from the stress. Yoon-hyun said that after finding 8 yellow bamboo roots and performing the dragon vein chi method, he can now maintain his eyesight for 3 hours. Yoon-hyun looks at the bamboo roots and thinks that there is no need to sell them anymore since he can solve the financial problems on his own. The image shows the entrance to a cave surrounded by greenery and rocks, with no visible characters. Yoon-hyun looks at the man in the orange jacket who is lying on the ground and breathing heavily after something intense. Yoon-hyun recalls Kim Young-hoon's 6 volumes of research and his final instructions before his death. The man thinks that if he passes on the knowledge to Kim Young-hoo, he will surpass his past life. Yoon-hyun speculates that once he reaches his martial peak, he will be able to receive teachings from Kim Young-hoon that will surpass the knowledge from his past life. Yoon-hyun walks past his sleeping colleagues by the fire and thinks that he only has one option, unlike them. Yoon-hyun reflects on the need to practice endlessly to maintain skill and get used to it mentally. Yoon-hyun thinks about his first goal in life, to get rid of the burning pain that comes with using his vision. Yoon-hyun creates 3 glowing blue lotuses surrounded by mystical smoke and energy. Yoon-hyun emerges from the dark cave into the light, striding determinedly across the rocky ground. Against the backdrop of a bright sunny sky and green trees, Yoon-hyun calmly watches nature with a slight smile on his face. Yoon-hyun knelt down and extended his hand towards the huge red-eyed fox that had just arrived in this world. Yoon-hyun looks ahead with a slight smile and wonders if he will see the red lines. The image depicts a viciously growling wolf with red eyes, preparing to attack. Yoon-hyun screams in panic that everything is red and makes a sound of fear. He realizes his defeat, looking at the huge bloody teeth in front of him, and thinks that he cannot win. Yoon-hyun, with a tense expression, wonders why everything in his field of vision is colored red. Yoon-hyun and 2 other men float in the night sky above the trees, watching the stars. 3 men with red glowing eyes float in the air against the backdrop of a red vortex, while someone below notices in horror that everything around is red. He understands the difference between a martial artist and a cultivator, and realizes that he cannot win because there is no chance to attack. Yoon-hyun speculates that it would be difficult for someone to defeat the weakest cultivators at the first level of the chi refining stage. In the darkness of the rain, the illuminated stone altar is surrounded by darkness and the sounds of falling drops. Yoon-hyun explains something with a slight smile while making a gesture with his hands in front of a rocky wall. A character with blue hair and horns smiled and asked what was going on. Yoon-hyun, holding the woman in his arms, explained something to the man with the wound on his arm, while the other two listened and asked about the red sphere that the cultivators had. The image shows a character with blue hair and horns smiling and saying the word consciousness. Yun touches his forehead, looking forward in concentration. The sound of his fingers tapping can be heard. Yun asks if their curiosity is satisfied and receives gratitude in return. The image shows a man in an orange jacket with a frightened expression on his face. He's clearly surprised or worried. An elderly man with a staff leaned over to a kneeling girl who covered her head with her hands. Yun creates a vortex of energy that pulls the two men into a dark portal. Yun and another man fall into the water, surrounded by bubbles and light, creating a sense of depth and movement. Hyun found himself underwater and exclaimed to himself in surprise. The image shows a bright blue sky with white fluffy clouds and a glowing sun. Hyun squeezes a wet cloth with water leaking out against a sandy beach. Hyun takes off his shirt on the beach while a man in an orange jacket lies on the sand behind him. A man in an orange jacket speaks tensely, trying to explain something important, while sweating and nervously touching his mouth with his hand. Hyun buttons his shirt and thinks about how this lake is called Chicken Head. Hyun stands on the shore, asking what they should do next while the other man walks towards the water. Hyun noticed buildings across the lake and the other person agreed with his observation. Hyun jumps into the water, saying he brought clothes and food with him. Hyun floats in the water and thinks that if his memories are correct, then... He explains that this building is a bandit lair and says that in a past life he destroyed them there. The man with two swords explains that their leader and deputy are at high levels, while the rest are small fighters of medium and low rank. Hyun explains that his sword has poison on it to destroy enemies with numbers. A man with a mustache asked in surprise what this thing was, while other men were busy unloading cargo against the backdrop of a village. Two men on the shore wonder who dared to swim so far, watching Hyun standing in the water. Hyun confidently walks through the water, creating splashes around his feet. Hyun stands in the water as another man with a club rushes at him, shouting threats. Hyun sent his opponent flying into the air with a powerful kick, showing off his strength and skill in combat. Several men in traditional dress react with surprise and fear to an unexpected event. Hyun tightly grips a wooden stick against a blue sky. Hyun, holding a baton, walked up to the man who had fallen on the sand and called out to him. A man with a mace shouts an angry curse as he prepares to attack. Hyun delivers a powerful blow to his opponent with his mace, causing a splash of blood against the clear sky. Three men in traditional clothing react to an unexpected event with tense expressions on their faces. Hyun begins speaking, addressing the other person with the phrase, "Now, from this moment on." Hyun stands with a baton, addressing a group of armed men against a backdrop of a village and mountains. Against the backdrop of a wooden multi-story building with stairs and balconies, peace and quiet surround the place. In a room, three men laugh at a woman who pours them a drink, while another woman brings a tray of cups. She, tied up and angry, screams at another man who looks scared and hurt. A man with a beard reacts in surprise when tea is poured for him, saying, "Huh?" Hyun stands in the doorway with a club and a severed head in his hands, while another man looks at him in horror. A man sits on a tiger chair and expresses irritation by calling someone a bastard. Hyun sits on a tiger throne as armed men surround and threaten a man with a stick in a wooden hall. Hyun, with a slight smile and a bloody stick in his hand, addresses someone, saying that they are all. Lifeless bodies lie on a deserted beach with blood around them, while wooden buildings rise in the background at the foot of the mountains. The man, in a panic, begs for mercy, calling his interlocutor a master of the highest level. Hyun stepped firmly onto the red carpet and began asking the question. Hyun stands with a bat asking if he was here, and one of the fallen replies that it was about 15 minutes. Against the backdrop of a burning building, a story is told about the need to set the place on fire, retreat and destroy the enemies one by one with a poisoned sword. Hyun clutches the bloody stick and reflects that in 15 minutes he dealt with all the enemies with just this item. Hyun stands with a stick while another man begs him, promising to tell him where he hid the money. On a red background with black spots and lines, a sharp explosion or impact with a loud sound is depicted. Hyun, injured and with blood on his shirt, says he knows where it is, remembering the last time. Hyun carefully opens the lock on the wooden door. A distinctive clicking sound is heard. A group of people knelt down in gratitude for the vengeance on the robbers, expressing appreciation for justice. Hyun stands with his back to the action, with blurred lines creating a sense of movement. Yoon-hyun turned around after hearing the sound and looked back carefully with a slight smile. The man anxiously asks if his interlocutor has anything, expressing hope for an answer. Yoon-hyun, holding a baton, asks for information by lightly touching his head with his hand. Yoon-hyun smiles slightly and touches his face, expressing calm and slightly thoughtfulness. Yoon-hyun is seen on a boat with another man on a river in an ancient town, explaining that they forged passes and bought an estate. Yoon-hyun and another man in black prepare for a sword fight in front of a traditional building under a clear sky. Yoon-hyun meditates in the lotus position, glowing blue lotuses hovering around him as he focuses on the energy emanating from the plants in front of him. Yoon-hyun thinks about someone that they are growing faster and almost achieving something important. Yoon-hyun watches a man meditate and reflects on how some reach the highest level, thanks to the guidance of a martial artist. Yoon-hyun, holding a sword, walked up to the seated man, who chided him for reaching a high level of skill prematurely. The man says with a determined expression that he didn't expect to have such fighting skills. Yoon-hyun wistfully recalls that he was always the one who trained under another person. Yoon-hyun grips the hilt of his sword tightly, preparing for action. Yoon-hyun stands with a sword, looking at the man who is leaning on his knee as if he had fallen or been hit. Yoon-hyun delivers a second blow with his sword, sending his opponent flying into the air into the forest at the foot of the mountain. Yoon-hyun describes the clash of the severing pulse blade with the dragon tomb while holding the glowing sword in his hand. In the forest, red and blue glowing rays fly quickly between the trees. Yoon-hyun notices his blue line is retreating and decides to dodge the enemy's attack. Yoon-hyun stops on the grass and thinks that if he dodges, he will constantly retreat backwards. Yoon-hyun thinks that now is his last chance to defeat the enemy and quickly attacks with his sword. Yoon-hyun thinks Kim Young-hoon will grow at an alarming rate. Yoon-hyun fights with a sword against an opponent and thinks that next time, the opponent will be so much stronger that he won't even be able to meet his gaze. Yoon-hyun and his opponent simultaneously jump into an attack with weapons in hand in a forest clearing. Yoon-hyun tensely raises his sword, thinking that this anomaly is his last chance to win in life. Yoon-hyun clenches his hand into a fist, his fingers tipped with sharp metal claws. Yoon-hyun charges forward with determination, despite the swords flying towards him, ready to put everything on the line. A man deflects a sword blow to defend himself from a sudden attack. Yoon-hyun thinks to himself that he broke the rhythm of his opponent's stance, preparing to attack in the open field. Yoon-hyun thinks he's ahead in real combat experience until the sound of hitting grass is heard. Yoon-hyun attacks with his sword from above, causing a massive explosion, while another man stands below with a sword in his hand, preparing to fight. Yoon-hyun prepares to attack with a slight smile, picking up rocks and showing determination in battle. Yoon-hyun senses a strong sense of danger and internally warns himself of an impending threat. Yoon-hyun raises his glowing sword, causing a powerful energy blast around him. The man screams and delivers a powerful blow, causing destruction around him. Yoon-hyun thinks intensely that if he goes for a frontal attack, he will be cut into pieces. Yoon-hyun concentrates and delivers a powerful sword strike, surrounded by a whirlwind of energy and dust. Yoon-hyun stands on a cliff and with a powerful swing of his sword, releases a bright stream of light downwards. A powerful explosion was heard in the sky above the forest, with a bright blue flash and a sound that broke the silence. Dust flares up and rocks fly around, creating an atmosphere of destruction, but Yoon-hyun is not visible at this moment. The shadow of a man with a sword appears in the smoke. He makes a sound and laughs. Yoon-hyun was surprised to see that his counterattack was withstood, although normally the blade should have broken and the enemy should have been sent flying back. The blade plunges into the ground next to the leg, and speech is heard from off-screen, but the words are not visible. Yoon-hyun holds the shining sword with a slight smile and laughs softly. Yoon-hyun, drawing his sword, admitted that from now on he would never be able to defeat his opponent. Yoon-hyun asked if there was anything else, to which the second man replied yes and handed him the box. Yoon-hyun shows a stack of books and explains that it is a martial arts manual called Record of Martial Arts Transcending Through Cultivation and Jumping. Yoon-hyun accepts a blue package from another balding man in a traditional room with a slight smile. A man reads a book, devouring all 6 volumes of the Records of Martial Arts, Transcending Through Cultivation and Jumping. The image shows a traditional building against a clear sky with clouds with no visible characters. Yoon-hyun happily holds the bag and announces that he caught something. Yoon-hyun, holding a bag, asks in surprise if someone disappeared while standing at the door in the room with books on the floor. Yoon-hyun looks around the room and thinks there is no sign of the other person. He must have left. Yun looks in fear at the sinister ghost with dark eyes and an evil smile that appears in front of him in the room. A man with a book in his hand stands in a room and smiles, radiating a mysterious aura as if saying something important. Yun notices the strange technique with surprise and thinks about it internally. The man says that in his past life, Kim Yong-hoon used the ability only after reaching the 5th level, and now, less than a year after the regression, he can already use it. The man reads the scroll and tells Yun that even he, who has reached the peak, should not fail to notice this. Yun thinks about talent with a slight smile, saying that everything is as expected. The man offers his brother Kim to go to the fighting world to gain experience, but he refuses, not wanting to go with him. The man answers thoughtfully, agreeing with the interlocutor who stands in front of him in a room with a traditional interior. Yun asks about the imperial court with a slight smile and crossed arms. In a traditionally decorated room, Yun starts a conversation by addressing his brother Seo. Against the backdrop of a majestic palace, the narrator explains that the Yan royal family was more closely connected to the cultivators than any other group. Huge blue hands hang over the illuminated palace in the night, as if preparing to grab or protect something. A crowd of people walks down the street to the palace gates, where 3 armed guards in armor with red feathers on their helmets stand. Several warriors in armor with red and blue feathers on their helmets fight with swords near the palace, shouting battle cries. Yun stands with a sword in front of the palace and reports that he passed without problems. The image shows a man in traditional clothing and a hat, saying something serious while looking up at his interlocutor. Yun confidently holds a staff and addresses another man in traditional clothing against a palace backdrop. Yun reveals that he was accepted into the Imperial Shadow Guard and trained for 4 months in stealth techniques before being assigned to guard the emperor. In the throne room, Yun sits on a dais surrounded by guards in red and green clothes. A man in traditional dress orders the crowd to stop with fear and tension in his voice. On the throne sits a man in luxurious clothes, radiating confidence and calm, surrounded by a glowing aura of power.